we'll see who cancels who.
Abominable.
You're a cucks.
All right, there we are.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha, man.
Oh, hey, how's it going? Sorry, I'm so used to using Discord. Usually people contact me on that, but how you doing?
Can you hear me?
Loud.
Or the most commonly spoken words in the English language at this point. Can you hear me? Because we all get on these calls and we all have to ask that question.
Oh yeah, true. I guess especially for university stuff, you guys are probably using Zoom a lot more now, huh?
Oh my God. Yeah. And I got into, Jeff got me on Discord.
All right. Just making sure. Sometimes people come on and they don't know that they're being broadcasted, so I just want to make sure you didn't say anything crazy.
Yeah. Wait, are you? So we're gonna go. You're gonna broadcast live here?
Oh, yep. So we're live now. Yeah. So don't.
All right. Awesome, man.
No addresses or anything.
All right. So I will, and I'll watch what I say.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming you're fine. But
yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are and what's going on? What we're chatting about?
Yeah, Sam Richards. I teach the largest race, culture, and ethnicity class in the world. Probably we have about 800 students every semester, and been doing it for 30 years. 30 years, 3 decades at Penn State University. I'm in the sociology department, and for a hot minute, I was an adjunct in the African American Studies department. Taught a class on race inequalities for about 12 years, an upper division course. But this class that I teach is kind of half U.S. issues and half international issues.
Sure.
So we're kind of really all over the place, and I'm very much a generalist. So I know a little bit about a lot. I know just enough about things to get me into trouble if I say too much.
Gotcha.
Because the experts step in, kind of like you, actually, right? Then the experts step in and they all say like, hey, you've overstepped. You're punching above your weight, so to speak.
Yeah.
So.
Regardless of how you feel about the book, because I know there's a lot of fair criticism, but I didn't realize there was such a huge divide academically between like generalists and specialists until I read that Guns, Germs, and Steel book. I'm sure you've heard of it, yeah? Yeah. And there are fair criticisms of it, but it was funny how much sometimes things would seem to come down to like, if you don't have specialties in this area, you just have no business talking about it. And then other people say, well, generalists are good because they can weave these narratives that everybody can understand, and like it's important to be able to tell the whole story. And then people say, well, they always get these details wrong and it fundamentally changes things. And those fights are interesting, yeah.
Academics, we get lost. I mean, listen, the only cred that we have, really, in a certain sense, and to a degree. Now, I'm going to take a big critique here, so I'm going to take a big swing.
Sure.
And I'll do it carefully.
Okay.
But a lot of us don't have a lot of value, right? The Earth, if we all went away, the life's going to keep going, right? As opposed to like people that work on sewage systems and electricians and this sort of thing, right? The people who really can keep things functioning, like when it all breaks down, nobody's going to need the sociologist, right? To sit around and analyze how things go. So, but one of the places where we get credibility is having a lot of kind of pedantic information about very small things, right? That maybe, they matter in our field, which might mean to like a half dozen other people in the world. It could mean 60, it could mean 160, but so something like that. I mean, what Diamond did was come along and in that book and offer a really innovative and very unique perspective and kind of tying everything together.
Yeah.
And then what he does is gives lots of other people a new starting point. It's like, it's like cliff diving, right? If you keep diving off the same cliff, you're just going to have the same experience. But what he did was say, hey, wait, check out all these other cliffs over here and take a dive, take a jump, see what happens. And so, but the people who have spent 30 years studying the minutia, right? That for them, like they didn't, and nobody, they weren't on PBS, right? They didn't have a bestseller. They didn't have any of that. And so then they get their feathers all ruffled kind of thing, so.
it's kind of funny because I've seen there's like a parallel debate almost. They seem unrelated, but I think they're very similar. For a while, people going into STEM fields, especially computer-oriented people, the idea is that like, I don't need an English class. I don't need to know how to write stupid papers or whatever. I just need to be able to do my job really well. And then I think we've kind of realized as time goes on, well, actually, being able to communicate with your boss or other people is actually kind of important. It's okay to be a little bit more well-rounded. You're not just a cog in a machine who just has to program. Like these other skills are good. But I feel like I would like to levy the same criticisms at academics. One of my biggest frustrations is you'll get these people that will come out and they'll be like, you'll get like, maybe like a pop philosopher like Sam Harris, or maybe kind of like pop psychology, arguably for Jordan Peterson. I don't know if I'd go as far as he's like pop psychology, but you'll get these people that will throw their hat in the ring who have these like ideas, and then all of the academics will come out to criticize them. Well, this was wrong, well, that was wrong. It's like, okay, well, why don't you guys do anything to communicate these ideas? It's so frustrating that there were some ideas that were so pervasive for so long. Are you familiar with the concept of race realism?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one. And it's like, I don't like that I'm the guy that has to be out here debating it because, oh my God, these topics are unbelievably complicated, and I'm trying to watch like 12-hour courses on, oh God, the guy with the big hair, he teaches so many good biology courses. And now I can't even remember his name, but like I'll try to like watch through all this stuff, and there's so much information. It's like I wish that like the people that actually study this professionally would come out and like make statements on this, or give good breakdowns or good reasoned arguments about why these things are happening or not happening, rather than just coming out and saying like, oh well, race realism is wrong. It's like, okay, that argument might have worked 20 years ago, but it's not. Sapolsky, is who I was thinking of, but that's not good enough anymore. Like you need to actually step into the ring instead of just getting mad that everybody else is doing it.
Well, again. I think there are probably a lot of reasons for that. Many of the reasons are rooted in ego. We don't have a lot going on necessarily, right? I mean, mostly nobody, in a larger society, people aren't really knocking down our doors to get us to come talk to them. And so, a lot of times when someone makes a bit of a stir or so people pay attention, there's an article in the New York Times or something covering them, and in kind of in a broad, more general way, people just naturally feel some kind of way about that.
Sure.
And I get it, right? But at the same time, I'm very much with you. I just feel like the older I get, by either by chance or because I really planned it this way, and I'm not really sure which one it is, but I feel like I've acquired a bit of wisdom along the way. And that wisdom mostly comes through comparing and contrasting lots of different fields of study and lots of different information. So if I'm reading about insects, or I'm reading about human beings, or I'm reading about, like some of the stuff we're going to discover from the James Webb Telescope, I mean, it's all going into the same place. It's going into this big head here, and it's going to kind of get, knocked around a little bit, and I'll have better thoughts about the field that I actually study, so. Yeah, so that's kind of cool. At the same time, I have an interesting thing going on. By the way, am I talking too much?
No,
like you want?
You're good. Go.
All right.
They listen to me talk all the time, so.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I've had this experience with Korea where I've become a person that a lot of folks in Korea are listening to, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. But a lot of folks, and I'm a generalist, right? There are specialists about Korea, and I say this all the time to Korean audiences. Like, listen, there are certain questions you can't really ask me because there are specialists out there who've been studying Korea for 30 and 40 years. I mean, you got to ask them these kinds of questions. But what I do, I can give you a perspective on Korean culture that comes from my study and my understanding of cultures all over the world and my travel, that I've spent time all over the world. And so I can give you a perspective of what's going on right now in Korea from comparing what's happening in Nigeria, or what happened in, with Bollywood in the 80s, or Latin America, or the Middle East, and, this kind of thing. So I give you just enough, and I give you what I think are some really interesting ideas. But if you want me to go too deep, I can't go there. That's not what I do. That's not my specialty. So. But for me, I can own that, I think it's important to own that.
What is the commentary that you're doing related to Korea that I guess people are looking to you for?
Well, like how you, and the Korean wave, and really understanding the wave, and the development, the sort of expansion or the expression of Korean culture all over the world that started, really started probably very slowly about 40 years ago, but it really very much took off in the past 10 or 15 years. So K-pop, K-drama, K-film, K-cuisine, K everything. And wow, Korea is just blown up. The Korean economy, Korean politics, Korean everything. I mean, it's phenomenal. So it starts with, a band like BTS, which is arguably the most popular, performance artists who have ever existed on Earth, right? And like, wow, nobody would predict that. But I was a guy that kind of 4.5 years ago, I made a statement about BTS that just kind of randomly got picked up in Korea and kind of took off. And then I started talking more about Korea, although I've been studying Korea for 30 years, but not seriously. I'm a Latin Americanist by training, so.
Okay.
But that's my take on I think I have some really interesting things to say in sort of a broad way, right? Comparing and contrasting. But if you ask me to go too deep, I can go deep as well, but I'm not going to go deep in the place where you maybe want me to go deep. I'll go deep somewhere else. But that's where the uniqueness comes in. So that's like, listening to you, right? I was listening to the debate you did on Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, yeah, and I've been studying. I've been to Ukraine. I've been studying Russia since I was studying the Soviet Union in the early 1980s. I was going to be a Soviet scholar at one point, and I decided not to. And so I was listening to what you were saying, and what you were saying were actually a few really. There were many interesting things that you said, but you said a few really, really innovative things that I said, like, whoa, okay, that was cool right there. And I don't remember what they were, but the point is, you're not a scholar of this, right? Like, it's not what you do 24/7. And so you came at this in such a really interesting way. And I thought, okay, that's the value. But you're also a thinker, right? So, you
try
can
to be
just
sometimes.
apply your, yeah. Well, you are. I mean, you're thoughtful, right? So so you're able to kind of take an innovative approach to something and say, well, what if we thought about it like this, right? And then you make a statement. And mind you, if you're an academic, you don't do that, right? You got to be really careful about that, because you got about 100 other people watching you going like, oh, okay, hang on, we're ready to assess and give you an answer to that. Whereas you're in it, and I'm going to use this word, but I mean it in the best of ways, because I apply it to myself. You're in a way kind of naively saying, like, what if we look at it like this, right? This is like the young mind is very mature, so it's cool. That's the value, I think, of what you do.
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
definitely, obviously, being who I am, I would agree. The one thing that I wish that more people would recognize for other people that are like me. So these other kind of like, I would, as critical as I am of like alternative media, I would classify myself as essentially being alternative media. I wish that people were more honest about the limitations of that. Like, so in some sense, what you're saying is correct, that like, because of my naivety, I can come at problems in kind of like novel ways or new ways.
Yes.
Sometimes that's really cool, and it might make for like, oh wow, like an outsider saying this, and I would have never thought to think about that like that before. But in other ways, it can be really stupid. Like, well, of course you're considering this because you don't know about this, or that. So I always try to be careful in that, like, well, this is like the limitations of my approach. Like, maybe I can present a new idea or whatever, but keep in mind that like without specialist knowledge, like there might be reasons why, this is something that other people haven't considered. And I tend to err on the side of caution for that, because it's a bit arrogant to assume that like, and people will do this all the time. Like, like, oh, well, like this problem, this macro econ problem could be fixed so easily. Why doesn't like a central bank just do that? And it's like, man, people have been studying macro econ for 50 years and don't know any. So I try to avoid that, because there's a huge level of arrogance that alternative people can pick up, especially if they happen to make 1 or 2 or 3 right predictions, but for all the wrong reasons, they can all of a sudden think that they're gods on earth. So, yeah,
exactly. I think that's Well, the beauty is, and I think you know this, well, clearly you do. When you encounter someone who's brilliant, and and as you're listening to that person and saying, "Whoa, okay, this is brilliance right here," and I'm not going to reach that. So let me just acknowledge it, and then everything else that comes out of my mouth comes out with a sense of of just humility, I guess, right? So I'll throw a few ideas out to talk about this or that or the other thing, but I'm going to do it with a certain humility because the brilliance. When I was 24 years old, I submitted a paper for a conference on Marxism and religion, and it got accepted. And so I went. I was 24. I mean, oh my God, I'm just a little kid, right? And I wasn't born. I went to a working class high school, and I spent the entirety of my high school smoking weed, and I graduated somewhere in the 80th percentile of my class. No, hang on, the 20th, right, the lowest part. And the grades didn't matter, but I was a reader. I was an avid reader. And then when I started college, I only applied to University of Toledo. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I got in, and later realized they let everybody in.
Sure.
And after 2.5 years, I was still a freshman. And I finally one day just decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to be a student for the first time. So I was playing music. I was a rock and roller, and I stopped working. And I decided to be a serious student. I want to be well, I had a lot of catching up to do, right? So I was 20 years old. So now, mind you, the difference between a verb and a noun, I don't know, you know what I mean? So but I worked at it. I really, really worked, and I loved learning. And so, I was starting fresh. Well, fast forward 4 years, I'm sitting on a panel with none other than a young Cornell West, right? Now, mind you, so we're on this panel together, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm going into this conference as this 24-year-old thinking I'm big stuff, right? It wasn't a big conference, but still. And then, luckily, Cornell spoke before me, and I went, oh, okay. Oh, whoa. And this guy, he never even looked at his notes. I mean, he was just going, and he was probably early 30s at that point, right? Like, oh man, it was just such a humbling moment for me. And it was the first of many, actually, but luckily it happened right there. So then from then on, as a graduate student, all through the rest of my career, I always knew that I was really a nobody, and I was never going to reach where he is. And it was very helpful,
Gotcha.
You ever listen to him talk? You ever listen to really take him when he's just going in 1,000 directions, Well, you listen to people
a bit.
That,
He was actually at the event that I was just at a while ago in New York City. It was funny because he was backstage and he was very friendly to everybody that came off the stage. Like, you did a good job, really good job. He was like shaking everybody's hand backstage. I remember that. I only remember because of his crazy hair, but yeah.
Yeah.
But he seemed like a friendly guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's good for us.
Yeah. Good representation or good for?
Well, no. It's good to have folks who really are just, you have to be humble enough to know what your limitations are.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
You are. I really I've listened to you more. I mean, Jeff Hamill is the person who introduced me to you, and he's the one who took my live stream, as you know, and just took it out into the world. And now we're at over 70 million views everywhere in the world. But, he just said hey, you got to listen to this guy, right? So I started listening to you, and you're very, you just have a nice way of just coming at things and approaching stuff. And I think it's really important. Yeah,
I try my best most of the time. So one of the, obviously this is I don't know how, actually, have you ever done shows like this where you go on and you chat about, I guess, college stuff or to random internet celeb kind of people, or is it pretty insular? Do you do university stuff generally, or what?
No, I'm pretty much all over the place. I mean, I do a lot of work internationally, so
gotcha.
Lots and lots of different things. I mean, I'm all over, right? I work with the police, I work with the military, I work here, I work there. I'm kind of do a
Gotcha,
little bit
gotcha.
of everything.
Well, I guess then, so you've probably talked about this before, but it's kind of come up a lot on my stream. It's always hard to get a feel on what is actually happening in schools because, like, obviously what I'd like is, like, show me a study that, controls for a bunch of things and then compares this to that, and then we can see everything. But that's really hard to do when it comes to, like, feelings of political expression on campus or how students feel about things, how professors feel about things. I guess, like, one of the big concerns I've had, and I see a lot of people having these concerns, but again, it's hard to quantify it, and I want your opinion on it. So it kind of feels like when I was going to school way back in 2008, so long ago, not that long ago, but when I was going to school, at least even at that point, it kind of felt like, or the idea that I was sold, even at that time, was that college was the last place that you were supposed to go to be challenged. Like, this is going to be the place where you go, you're going to hear new ideas, some of them might make you uncomfortable, but that's part of the college experience. And this is really the last place you're going to ever have to explore those kinds of ideas, because once you get out in the world, it's not the job of, like, your workplace to challenge you ideologically, or, you don't want people on the street, confronting you over things you believe. This is like your last ditch effort for sanitization against crazy ideas or exposure to ideas.
Or unless you get Jehovah's Witnesses knocking at your door, then you have an opportunity to talk.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
yes,
if you want
I
to
agree with you.
break out my edgy high school atheism internet debate times, that would be the time to do it. But it feels like today the approach to schooling has kind of become markedly different, where you have a lot of these concepts from sociology that in and of themselves aren't bad. And in and of themselves, I think I would agree with most of them. We can get into specifics if you want. Things like the paradox of intolerance or safe spaces or whatever. Like, I don't think any of these ideas are bad on their own, but it feels like these have all kind of, like, come together in a way to create these, like, radically intolerant environments where there is kind of like a certain... I sound like a crazy conservative when I say this, but, like, there's this type of, like, progressive orthodoxy that is, like, rigidly enforced from top to bottom, and it's very good at excising anything that doesn't seem to toe the line. Do you feel like that? Do you feel like that's, like, an accurate feeling that schools are kind of shifting in that direction, or do you think that's kind of an illusion created by just a few cherry-picked examples? Or I guess, what is your feeling on that?
Yeah, the answer is yes and no. Okay. So to give you folks a sense of, let me say a little bit more about who I am, so people have this sense, right? So I teach this class, 800 students from all over the world. It's about generally speaking, it's about 45% are white people, but all backgrounds, class backgrounds, religious backgrounds, etc. Right? I'm in the middle of the heat, right? I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, there's nobody who's more in the center. It's a big state university, Penn State University, and I'm willing to push the boundaries of things. We had a television show we worked on. The title was "You Can't Say That," right? That won an Emmy Award, actually, the first episode, and so David Horowitz labeled me one of the 101 most dangerous professors in America some 15 years ago. Okay. And, Fox News takes me on, and Black Lives Matter at Penn State tries to cancel me. I mean, from all over the place, I'm going to get hit somehow. So I'm willing to really kind of push things and everything, right? That my job is to challenge everybody. You walk in my class, my job is to change your mind. Whatever you're thinking, I just want to change it somehow. You can decide how that is, but I want to shake you up, okay? Sure. I'm a registered libertarian, right? So, I studied Marxist sociology, but I stay a registered libertarian. I read libertarian stuff because sociology itself just is inclined to lean toward the left, because what we do is we try to understand all the invisible strings and factors and forces that shape our behavior. Yeah. And what we want to improve society. We want to make it better. And so therefore, when we identify what all those things are, then we say as sociologists, well, you got to change this, you got to change this, you got to change this. And then all these outcomes will happen, right? Well, when you change those things, that means you're going to impose some outside will on, which is going to come from the state or the government. You're going to impose that on populations of people, right? So that's like this sort of socialist bent to it. Well, this is what we do as sociologists, right? Like we have we have an obesity problem. Like, so, well, one way to do it is stop allowing businesses to sell 64-ounce sodas, man. No one needs a 64-ounce soda.
Sure.
And so, like, we study this and we see if we did that, we could lower the incidence of obesity. And so we say, okay, do that. Well, then we get the critique of being on the left and socialists and all this kind of stuff. We're imposing our will on everybody. Well, I'm trained to do that. And so what I do is say, man, I'm going to be neck deep in the libertarian literature to make sure that I balance myself out.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be right here. I want to be in the center. I want to challenge myself constantly, right? Okay, so that's the background for me. Look, first off, most people are sleeping through school. Right?
Sure.
School is really not very interesting. And most classes, what do? We have trained legions of students for years and years and years, and it's getting probably more problematic, actually, to memorize facts and spit them back on exams and get grades and then be done and say that we're educated. And then we, wipe the slate clean, we wipe our brains clean, and we go to the next exam, the next class, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Well, increasingly, we've just organized schooling around that. It makes sense. It's rational, makes sense. Not everybody can have the high-paying job. Not everybody can have this and have whatever it is that people want. We just need to have markers to know that who are we gonna let through the doorway. Mm-hmm. So it's a very rational way to do it, and that's how we run schooling. That's not true of all schooling, but across the board, I will say probably most classes at Penn State, when I ask students, and not just at Penn State, anywhere, we ask students like, hey, how are your classes? Oh, it's boring. Oh, really? Well, what's going on? The teacher just lectures at us, writes on the board, we take notes down, and then what do? Well, I studying them for an exam, and and then move on. Right? This kind of thing. I'm like, okay, where's the critical thinking happening? Well, I sit around with my friends. That's not true in every single class, but it's true in far, far too many, and it's true across the board at universities, except a few select universities, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if that's the case, then what's it matter that we have a free speech zones, or we have safe zones, or we have, nobody pays attention. Like, if I say, like, hey, at Penn State, like, here, there's certain safe zones on campus, right? Like, 99.9% of the students at a place like Penn State have no idea what I'm talking about, where it is, what that means. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. And it doesn't mean that because they're mean-spirited or therefore they're going to go out and start saying all these racist, sexist, homophobic things or whatever the case is, or they don't care about those issues. It just means that it doesn't matter what the institution does. For most people, they're just living their lives and moving on, and it's not really impacting them. And when we read that even some professor like me, I say something really radical in my class, and then it's picked up by Fox News, and Fox News is saying, like, oh, this professor trying to brainwash his students. Listen, man, 4 of the 800 students in my class even really heard me say it and understood the implications of that. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of students, they heard me say it, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay, all right, yeah, all right, and they move on. So there is a move to kind of adopt certain agendas, and I'm not sure it's just the liberal agenda, but for the day-to-day experience of the average student, it doesn't oppress them in any way whatsoever. Doesn't impress them either, but it doesn't oppress them.
Okay, yeah. So it kind of sounds like it sounds like when I was in school, like most people are there to just kind of show up and hopefully pass the test, get the degree, and then get out, basically. Yeah. And then hopefully and then if they're lucky, they're doing something like you're doing, right? Then they leave school and they start thinking in new ways. If you're really lucky, yeah. It's kind of funny.
That's my take on that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I was gonna say it's kind of funny because like I see like now that I'm out of college, I had to quit because I was doing I was working too much. But like after getting out of college and then spending time in the real world, I guess there's always that saying that youth is wasted on the young because you don't realize like all the opportunities, everything available to you when you're young. Yeah. Now I see that like it feels like in colleges, or in university in general, there's a lot of stuff to do and opportunities, and like going to class and just passing the test, that's like one of like maybe even the least important things that you can be doing on campus. There are like so many opportunities. There's frats, there's events, there's massive amounts of resources. You have libraries with subscriptions to things and everything. But it seems like for people that are like in school, you don't really think about any of that. You're just like, I need to go to school, pass the test, and then get out. And then looking back at it retrospectively, like, man, what a waste of time. Fuck, there's so much cool stuff you can do in college. Like, why would you just worry about this? Yeah. But I mean, I understand it, of course, for the people there and everything. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. Imagine what you would do if right now someone said, hey, listen, you can't do anything for the next 4 years. You can't do any of your work for the next 4 years. All you can do is you got to hang out at this college campus where you have a massive library, you have all these resources, and you got to be there for 4 years. Imagine how exciting that would be. You know what I mean? To not be interrupted by all
and then to be able to just explore other things on campus, talk to other students. Like there's, if you could go back, I don't know if I read a short story once where it was just an extended joke or whatever, but the idea of like aging in reverse would be so much fun because you'd be so much more equipped with the wisdom to take advantage of like all the opportunities on campus rather than like the really stupid way. And again, no offense to college, I was stupid, and I wouldn't expect anything different because you don't know the value of like what you could get out of college if you've never worked before. But it sucks because it's always like I think I find pretty ubiquitously throughout everybody I talk to that's aged 25 or 30 and over, like, what's the one piece of advice you try harder in high school, try harder in college, like make sure that you're doing more than just like going to, like, make sure you're not skipping class. Like it's always like I've never found somebody who's like, you know what, I wish I would have studied a little bit less, or I wish I would have done a little bit less in college, I wish I would have just partied more. Like I'm sure those people are out there, but generally the overwhelming amount is like take advantage of like what you have as a kid, even through 18, 24, because you have no idea when you have to wake up and work every single day, how much life changes,
Yeah, well, and the problem is when that message is coming from parents, there's also a subtext to it, which is, but make sure you get a job so I don't have to take care of you for the rest of your life. Yeah. Whereas me, I don't have kids. I just have my students and the sort of, and folks, and my take is take a year off, man. If you don't have student loans and you have time, take a year off or take a gap year or do whatever the case, whatever you can do. Oh my gosh, but yeah, it's we live in a college town here. I mean, it's a big college town, but we have a lot of retirement communities. And man, what an awesome thing that is. Hey, by the way, George Carlin has a really funny shtick where he like says, wouldn't it be interesting if life actually happened backwards? And he walks us through.
I'm almost positive that's what I was thinking of when I was referring to that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
it's very funny.
Yeah.
But by the way, I don't mean to say that, I mean, there is a sense in which universities have sort of organized ideologically around kind of a social justice kind of paradigm, right? And which I think, okay, that, it makes sense, right? I mean, I see that, what's the alternative, right? I mean, but the problem is, when social justice only starts to get defined in one particular way and it means one particular thing, as opposed to, lots of other things, so like, one thing I do in my class is, I really push the envelope on this kind of thing, right? Like I bring, last semester I brought 3 students who identified, one was African, one was Afro-Caribbean, one was African-American, to the front of the class, and we just talked about their experience and what oppression means and what this means and that means, and power and privilege and supremacy and all that kind of stuff. Well, but so then we started talking about Haiti and what it means to have an American passport or to be able to travel here to the U.S., to live here in the U.S., and cell phones, right? And all the slavery that exists in cell phones. I'm asking, hey, give me your cell phone, and I said, do you know how much slave labor is in this cell phone? And he's like, no, I don't. I'm like, well, why not? Like, how do you not know that? How do you have a cell phone? What would, and this was the African-American student, like, what would your ancestors say? That all you got to do is plug in slavery and iPhone, and you'll have 10 videos will pop up about all the slavery that's right in this phone, and you don't even take the time to do that. Like, come on, man. Like, what is that? And so what we don't have is enough challenges to everybody on those kinds of terms, because there are very few people like myself. I can do that, and I can do it, with 5 cameras in the room and streaming on YouTube all over the world, right? but most people would be very reticent to do that because we've created a kind of culture that makes it difficult for people to challenge the people who have been identified as being and certain groups of people, let's say.
We can, woke is kind of, feels very conservative to use the term, but yeah, it definitely feels like there's a, there's like a certain way of viewing the world and all of our problems, and the challenge of that is very, it seems like it's getting harder and harder to bring up on college campuses. Do you ever feel like or go ahead, yeah.
No, it is, but only for people who themselves aren't schooled in things, right? Like there's nothing I can't talk about because like I can do that. I mean, look, man, here I am. I've got 3 black students in the front of my class, and I'm saying, look, man, what the hell? What are you doing? Like, what would you say to your great grandfather about the fact that you own a product made by slaves that has slave labor in it, and you don't care even to look into that, and you don't even want to know? Because the one student was saying, well, I kind of heard about that. I'm like, you heard about that?
Yeah.
Like, and you didn't investigate it, and you still own your phone? Like this is, come on. And so I'm pushing, because that's my job, is to push. And my job is to make every single student in that class at some point uncomfortable with whatever position they hold, and to push them out of that. And you know what? And what we don't get, and this is what we don't get on the right, people like who are on the right and conservatives, the Tuckers of the world and so on, they feel like these students don't want to be challenged. And they do, man. Those 3 students were like, oh my God, that was amazing. I feel smarter as a result of you pushing me in the way that you just did. But, a lot of people just are uncomfortable.
Do you feel like, so I'm curious, because the story has been told time and time and time again, and it seems like the number of professors are mounting where they try to do something similar to what you're bringing up, and they end up getting pushback that's so severe that they end up, if not like completely ousted from their position, they're either forced to resign or basically like shunned into. Do you why do you think in your particular like department or your university, why don't you ever worry about this, or do you worry about this? Do you think it's coming for you eventually, or what are your feelings on that?
No, it's not coming. There's a few students, we had this move after. I've had times when folks on the right or on the left or whatever have tried to so-called cancel me, or just called me out on social media on certain things, but mostly people don't, because most people who do have never been in my class. If you're in my class, you see what's going on, and you trust me, right? Because I get what's happening. I've dedicated my life to this, 40 years of studying these kinds of issues, right? I've lived around the world, and I've been, I had the experience. I know how to talk about things, right? And it's like deep in me. Like I know how to talk about, just like hair, for example. We have a couple classes on up on YouTube, just all about hair. Well, I know how to talk about hair. I know a lot about hair. I'm like you, right? I'm going to learn about hair. I'm going to go out on my own. You went out and learned about Ukraine. You didn't study that your whole life. That's a new war. You said you've clearly been studying geopolitical issues, because the way I've listened to you talk about things, I'm like, okay, this guy's been thinking about this for a long time. But there are specifics about things that you got to go out and you got to learn a little bit. Well, that's what I do. And so I can talk about this stuff, and I know how to talk about it. I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth.
Gotcha.
Because I'm good at it. And a lot of people aren't. They're just like, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's like, oh God, when you say that, like, you're just a white man, or you're just whatever. It's like, oh, Jesus.
Have you
No, go ahead. Yeah, so go ahead.
No, go ahead. Because I was going to ask kind of something related to that last thing that you just said.
Well, like for example, most recently with trans issues and non-binary issues, right? Like, so for me, for 30 years, I've been talking about binaries, and like, what is this? Most of us are bi. I mean, like it's hard to be 100% straight or 100% queer, or not queer. That's 100% homosexual
Sure.
or heterosexual,
Yeah,
right? It's
you've got like the
hard to
McKinsey
be.
scale, and people say that we all kind of
Yeah,
exist
but
on it,
like,
yeah.
come on, man. Cause all you got to be is in the right moment or meet the right person. And you can be like, oh, okay, hang on. I can feel a something in here, right? So we're in there. So I've been like in the non-binary for years, right? And loving it. Well, for me, it's like about time people start using they and them. This is good, right? I've been thinking this for years and saying this for years. But yet, when I have a student who in front of class, let's say, who wants to be referred to as they or them, and in my class, I just keep tripping over it, right? Because I've been speaking the English language for 61 years.
Sure.
It's like, damn, there I did it again. Like, and like a couple of students come up and I say, listen, I'm going to trip over this because you present as he or you present as she, and I'm going to trip over it. You know that. And then I trip over it and I'm like, see, there, I turn my mic off. I'm like, hey, there, I just did it. But okay, whatever. But then I say it to the class, and the class has a trust in me that, like, okay, no, this guy really isn't. Because I got stories. I can tell you, 31 years ago, 32 years ago, when I counseled my very first student who was transitioning from he to she, from M to F, right? And I'm like, don't think you're calling me out, right? I've been in this a long time, right? And so I've been cool with this for a long, long, long time. But yet I'm tripping over it. And yet I look at some other person and like they're not tripping over it. I'm like, God, okay. But there has to be a trust. Like, yeah, this Sam knucklehead. Like, yeah, but we trust him, like, because got it. And I think a lot of people don't really have that because they just don't have the experience.
Yeah, so it's always hard to figure out sometimes because like somebody will make a claim about how like a professor or a certain person, they did something racist. And I'm like, okay, well, what did they do? And then you go and you'll read like the particular story. And if there are no quotes, you have to start making a lot of assumptions. Like, well, it seems like what they did wasn't necessarily that bad. But like, I could conceive of a world where the professor is like really compassionate and just said something like maybe a little bit too challenging for the students and it was taken the wrong way. Or another world where the professor is actually kind of a dick and it seems like he doesn't care about or have compassion for these issues. And then he brought up a challenging statement. And so understandably, people have that type of reaction,
Yes.
Yeah.
Or they tried to make a joke and it fell flat.
Maybe, yeah. It's really hard to tell. It's hard to tell sometimes because I get worried that more and more things are shifting into this direction to where originally I might read something, where, a professor does something that's racist, transphobic or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, were they an asshole about it? Like, was it really that, or was it that they were a jerk? But then I'm seeing more stories where it's like, this is getting harder to defend. There was a New York Times story about, do you know anything about Donald McNeil?
Yeah, I do, and I don't know the exact story, but I know
okay. He did a trip to Peru that he'd done a few times with some college kids, and I guess he was in the habit of having like challenging conversations with the kids, and a couple topics came up for that, and I think he eventually like got fired from the New York Times and everything. And when I read through that story, where there's a lot of information given, and I feel like I'm getting a decent perspective on it, I see stuff like that, I'm like, this seems kind of shitty. I don't think this guy should have been fired for that, or it's a little worrying that like the entire institution turned against him for that. Yeah, and I feel like some more of those seem to be popping up, and then I get a little bit worried because outside of that's in the academic world, that's a problem. Outside the academic world, or go ahead, yeah.
No, well, it's no wonder that people are afraid to touch these issues, right? I mean, look, for me, last summer when Fox News, Tucker did 2 pieces on me. And then just the whole right wing. I mean, they just picked it up. They were looking for the poster child for critical race theory.
Okay.
And they picked this clip out on me that was just like very nothing. And I mean, first off, they picked 2 clips out. Well, one was Andrew Sullivan did it. No, it was Distort Denusa, Dinesh D'Souza, right? When he was at Dartmouth, his nickname was Distort Denusa. Yeah. So he picked the first one up. I was critiquing this Coca-Cola. This is I mean, maybe you get this, right? But it was it's some kind of training that was happening at Coca-Cola, and somebody had put up kind of on a slide, white people need to be less oppressive and less ignorant and less stupid and less this and less that, right? And I was just like, oh my God, that's terrible, right? So I took those words and I put them on a slide, and I asked some white people just about it, I'm like, hey, so this is from a training that happened at Coca-Cola, and white people need to be less oppressive, less ignorant, less stupid, less this, less that, right?
Oh, I think I actually remember. I think I might have covered this in my stream, right? And they presented it as though you were telling your classroom this instead of I think I'm almost positive we went over this story. I didn't know that was you. Okay,
yeah. So just like that kind of thing, like, oh my God, like, and this kind. But if they would have taken it, and see, the left does this too, right? The left does it, the right does it. If they would have taken this segment and showed the entire segment on Fox News or whatever conservative site it was, they'd have been able to say, whoa, this sociologist is making a really good point about the absurdity of some of this, like, social justice, whatever, right? Like, it would have been a perfect opinion piece for Fox News, right? Yeah. Well, so would my other piece have been, actually, if they would have taken the entire clip, right? But they didn't do that. And so I can understand why people would start to get, very antsy talking about this. But what I've decided to do is put, and this is Jeff and I, but, this was kind of when he came along, said, we're going to put everything I ever do that we ever do in that room, we're going to put it out onto YouTube, so that nobody can ever say, like, you can always go back to see the original piece. Yeah. And so that's really that's the only way around it.
Yeah, I say even at that sense, it doesn't always work, but that's something that I figured out recently. I've gone full on to say that, like I'm not going to defend 15-second clips of me because I don't make 15-second videos. So whatever you're seeing, that's a 15-second video. That's not. I don't endorse that message. Like, you might see something that seems like highly irresponsible. It probably is, but it would be if I released it as a 30-second video. But that's not what I do.
Yeah, exactly. And so you just have to ignore it, and that's what I do. I ignore it. But here's the thing, right? So Penn State, they got hammered. Look, I was getting a hate email every 5 minutes. I had hundreds and hundreds. I had to stop checking my mail and answering my phone for about 3 weeks, right? But to its credit, my university, they watched the whole thing. They saw the clips. People, they get complaints all the time, and my bosses watch my whole class, and they say, "Oh, that was actually pretty cool. That was great." But somebody's going to complain about something, eventually. But to their credit, from the president on down, I've been here a long time. I'm not outlandish. I'm very thoughtful. I'm very careful in the kinds of things that I say, and they know that I challenge people, and they really have my back. And they just said, no, not at all. We're not. No. And people were demanding that I get fired, and it wasn't even remotely on the table, because there's a trust. And so what happens with a lot of people who haven't built up that trust, that they don't get the backing of their institution or their company or whatever it is. But when you're somebody like me, it's got 30 years of building up the trust. It's like, okay, and I think that matters.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with you. I was invited to there's a university in California called Pepperdine to talk to a bunch of high school students. They were like, it was like a youth seminar thing or whatever. And this audience, it must have been like, I want to say like, I don't remember 100%, but I want to say like 20 or 30% white. So very colorful audience, very different ethnic backgrounds, very strong social justice opinions. They were a highly active political group of young people in California. And I was kind of worried because it's like, if I'm invited to give speeches and things, like I want to challenge people. It's what I do on stream or whatever. And I was like very challenging of a lot of like, I think there were certain BLM narratives or trans narratives that I was like putting forth challenges to. But I think if you listen to me speak, like it's pretty obvious that I'm always coming from a place of compassion for these people and like bettering society. Yeah. And I was expecting to get a lot more of like the militant pushback, but I didn't. All the kids there were super excited to talk to me. And it was a super positive experience for me. I loved it. It was really fun. And people like write letters afterwards and they thank me for coming. I thought it was like really cute. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it's really hard sometimes to figure out, you just circling back on everything we've said. It's like, I wish I could see some of the confrontations that happen in class and then get the further background on it. Because it's so hard to tell if like the students are becoming activists and crazy, which to some extent I'm sure they are, or if like the professors are just huge fucking dicks, and like of course the students are always gonna have that type of interaction. I was lucky enough that for the kids that I was talking to, the person that went after me for speaking was Dennis Prager, who I'm sure you've heard of. And he kind of, in a way, went over similar topics, but I could see their response to him. But he was so much more aggressive in his rhetoric about it. Like, bringing up the idea that, like, there is no such thing as systemic racism. And a kid goes, well, why do you think, what about systemic injustice, like in the criminal justice system? Yeah. And he's like, black people are in jail more than white people because minorities commit more crime. Yeah. And it's like, that is true, but I feel like I could say the same thing without like the kids going crazy over it, because he's saying it in the most like provocative way possible. It's like, geez.
Well, the thing is, if you're gonna make that, he's gonna make an argument like that, and I'm like, hey, dude, that's actually not a very thoughtful argument. Yeah. Right.
And it's boring because it's not even like people committing crime isn't even the interesting question. The interesting question is why do they commit more crime? That's where you're actually getting into the thoughtful discussion, right?
Yeah, or it's. Yeah, it's just, do we want to get somewhere, or do we want to just
provoke people,
just beat people up, provoke people, and it's like, and he's now come in that world, like as a lot of these people have done. Like, so let's say somebody like me, I get canceled out, I lose my job, and then I become this darling of the right wing, and I just start attacking everything that is social justice or cancel culture or whatever it is, right? And like, there's a lot of money to be made. I mean, I could triple, quadruple my income easily.
Why I left the left.
If I just got myself fired and then you started going out on speaking tours. But like, it's just not very smart. It's not very thoughtful, and I don't want that. And besides, like, for me, I need to help the people who take a more of a social justice approach. I need to help them really firm up and sharpen their argument. And then the people on the right who are critiquing that, my job is to help them make better critiques of that. Like, be really better at the way you come at it. And so I have to be able to make both arguments, or all the arguments in between. And my job is just to help people. If you're going to hold that position, then here, let me help you hold the position, right? If you want to make the argument that we need to close down the borders in the South with Mexico, it's like, okay, you can make that argument. I wouldn't make that argument. Well, I might, but if you want to make it, here's the dumb way to make it, what I think, and here's a kind of a smart way to make it. So let me help you sharpen that up. And
that's always been.
Folks...
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that's just on that. Like, that's always been kind of like my thing, is that I've gotten frustrated that progressives are like dog shit at arguing for things these days. God. It feels like the reason why I got popular on the internet is because I kind of have like an internet bully background. So I can like do the bravado and scream at people and shout at people. And I'm a very like, I'm very like number and data driven. Like, all of my arguments, like, I'm never going to sit here and try to convince you that like we should let immigrants into the country because it's the right thing to do. That's never the argument I'm going to make. It's going to be reasons of economy. It's going to be reasons of like foreign politics. It's always going to be from those grounds. And it was always shocking to me because early in my internet career, for debating for like politics stuff, I'm like, I don't know why liberals run from like these like fact-based arguments, because like when we're arguing about like climate change, when we're arguing about like monetary policy, well, like we're arguing these things, like the conservatives don't have the data on any of these answers. The conservatives don't have the facts, but somehow the conservatives became the party of like, like your feelings don't care about my facts, or facts don't care about feelings. Like, well, dude, all of your arguments are either like theologically based or just based on like, this is what my small conservative community feels. How do we lose that? And so I fought like that early on, but then I feel like it's kind of gone back to that way where progressives are very scared to deal with any data-driven answers whatsoever. All of the arguments become like this type of like ethical orthodoxy of like, these are the progressive beliefs, and if you question any of them in any way, shape, or form, you're doomed. And then the issue you run into is, as you said, you don't have that like inoculation effect. Like, what happens when you step into the real world and somebody actually gives you a good argument for why, like, you know, should we give unlimited gender affirming care to trans people? What about when they detransition? Oh shit, the only time I've ever heard detransitioning brought up is when people said that's a transphobic thing, and I've never even talked to a person like that in real life. It's like, well, now you're not equipped to actually answer these questions in real life. And what's worse, anybody that's standing by on the sidelines watching these arguments happens sees a conservative that's really eager to dive into studies and data and fact, and progressives that are just saying, if you don't believe me, you're evil. And it's like, well, fuck, now you've lost. You've lost the arguments.
Yeah. Well, and so what I often see, or what I sometimes see, maybe often, is the liberals who, they don't have the data, and then they stay in this kind of moralistic place, and because it's just easier, because they can't make the argument. And the most fascinating thing that happens is when, you know, a liberal who's sort of rooted in the moralistic and argumentation encounters someone who's conservative with really thoughtful, sharp, and smart perspectives that are driven by facts and ideas, right?
Yeah.
And like the person has nothing to say. And the opposite happens. You know, the conservative that's just like basing on who knows, their vision of God or the vision of something, who I have no idea, who encounters someone who's really sharp and very thoughtful, and they have nowhere to go. And so, I mean, maybe that's just kind of where we're doomed to have those kinds of experiences, you know. It's
yeah, we could be, but I feel like there needs to be more like it just, I think if you see it, if you see the challenge and then you understand how to address the challenge, you're better equipped for it in the future. This is why like people get mad at me, but like I think that the worst types of people, I say worst from my perspective, should be allowed to like give speeches on college campuses. Like if you think that Nazis talking on a college campus is scary, you should wait until they're on 4chan or on Twitter, and now you don't have a professor to talk about the conversation afterwards. Now you don't have fellow people to reflect on anything they're saying. And it's so incredibly frustrating. Are you familiar with Matt Walsh and his recent documentary of like How to Be a Woman, or like What is a Woman, or whatever? It's basically, it's a big, his anti-trans documentary essentially. But it's so frustrating to see even academics sometimes that he'll interview that are unwilling to critically engage with his question. And like you should be able to because even if I engage with the question and somebody sees that, I might be seen as supporting that, and then I might be called out as being homophobic or sexist or racist or something. So it's better if I don't even talk about it. I mean, look, I can't get in trouble if I say nothing. Exactly, and that's the issue, right? Nothing ventured, nothing gained, I think, right? If you've got a whole academic institution that's too scared to even, like, again, toss their hat in the ring, the thing that progressives never seem to understand is if you're not willing to engage with that idea, they will. You know, it's kind of like the common talking point on the left is like, it's not my job to educate you. Okay, that's great that you feel that way, but Jordan Peterson loves educating people. Ben Shapiro loves educating people. So if it's not your job to educate, there's going to be somebody in the right to step up and do it. So when you abdicate that position, you've essentially ceded all of that ground to your ideological adversaries. Why would you ever do that? It just seems so insane, you know?
Yeah. I guess one of the things that I'm particularly careful about, and one of the things that kind of keeps me, you know, in the classroom, because it really does keep me, even though I do lots and lots of things outside the classroom. But, you know, I watch that eventually people just start to go too far, right? I've been kind of watching Peterson the past year or so. Like you get too, it's almost like you get too popular and you start thinking that you're bigger, or somehow you can get away with saying things. And, you know, this take on the swimsuit model thing or whatever. It's like,
the Elliot Page stuff.
You don't have to, just don't comment on that. Really, it doesn't matter. Right? What do you? It's just so many people. I mean, Shapiro, forget about Shapiro. Right? It's just their job. They make money off of being provocative, and like, I'm just like, there's no need for that. It's not going to get us anywhere. Now, mind you, I'm a professor, so like, my job is to work with people to mold minds and or help people mold their own minds, right? I mean, that's what I do. But my job is to confuse people. So, which is what I say all the time. I want, every time you leave my classroom, I want you to be confused. Or any talk that I give, I want you to be confused. Because that way you're going to have to go out and try to figure it out for yourself, right? But like, oh gosh, you know, these people that they make money off of this is like, it's it's a little bit troubling.
Yeah, you end up with like I mentioned this before. You kind of talked about this in the beginning, but for some reason, I always mention there's two types of people that get really good at something. The first type of person gets really good at a particular thing, and then they look around and they say, "Wow, I know so much about this thing. I bet every other topic could be equally as complicated." And then you've got the other type of person who gets really good at something. They're like, if I got really good at this one thing, I bet I know everything about everything. And I'm just going to go tell people, And that latter category is where I put, I'm not trying to provoke you. I don't know who you feel about, but I feel that way about like some people like Jordan Peterson, who I would say that like when he's talking about psychology, at least in the past, everything he's saying is like not even good, but even insightful sometimes. Like I think he had a lot of positive and valuable insight into psychology. I thought he was really good at getting those points across. Elon Musk has interesting things to say about stuff like limited to the realm that he's talking about, but that's another guy who gets like pretty good at like business related stuff, and all of a sudden he's like giving speeches on like general AI and everything. It's like, I don't know if you know anything about this. Like, why do I care about Elon Musk's opinion about cryptocurrency? I don't think I do. But yeah, some of these people start to step into every realm, and suddenly they become these what are they called? There's a word for somebody that is like not mathematics. There's a word for somebody that knows like every single topic or whatever. They seem to become these types of people, but they don't know everything about every topic. But then people start to worship everything they say. Oh, a polymath.
Polymath. Well, this is for me. The other side is, I always know, when I'm doing my thing in say in my classroom, right, in this space, I know there's somebody watching, or eventually is going to be watching, who is an expert on whatever it is I'm talking about. And it keeps me very careful. Like, keeps me humble, keeps me careful. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be an idiot here. But it also makes me a lot smarter, because then I know the places where I need to ask a question as opposed to giving an answer. And my most common answer to any question is like, well, I'm not really sure, but I kind of have a thought about that. But maybe it's also, if someone was paying me as much money as people are paying these guys, maybe I would just come up with answers and be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, that's another issue too, and I notice this in my world, I have to be a bit more combative, right? Because I'm trying to win an opinion over, and you're not paying to take a class with me. You're like looking at me as a competitor to the other people in the world that I inhabit. So there's this interesting middle ground I have to inhabit, where I'm usually willing to concede, like, I don't know about this particular thing. I don't have the background for it. But it's an interesting dynamic when I go to argue with somebody and they'll never make that concession. I think by me taking the more intellectually honest position, I can have the appearance of being weaker sometimes. There are times where, and I employed this strategy for a little bit, but then I stopped because I don't want to get caught doing this because it hurts my credibility. But like, I noticed that like if I prepare really well for a debate, a lot of people don't know this, but there aren't like millions of high quality studies out there. If you're debating almost any topic, there's going to be like a few pieces of key literature that people are talking about for almost any big topic. There's going to be like 2 or 3 studies you really need to know. So if I'm like really well versed on a particular topic, I'll know what the big studies are and I'll be able to talk about that. And it is crazy to me how many people will just cite a study to me in a debate and have the total opposite conclusion. And as soon as I push them on it, I'll be like, I don't think that that's right. They'll be like, oh, okay. And then they'll just move on. And it's like, wait, you don't even know what you're talking about. But I have to be careful, because if somebody brings something up where they're like, well, actually, it's actually been demonstrated through like a macroecon thing that, when you do this with rent control, this happens. And I'm like, oh shoot, if I take the cautious position and go, I don't actually know if that's true or not, I look weak because the other person is willing to assert that they know, even if they don't. And that's a really weird dynamic to have play out in conversations,
I experienced that in the opposite way, although I never really ask people, but I always, when I concede or I say, I haven't really thought about that, or I think what you're saying is actually not true. I don't know why that is. I have to go study it, but my gut tells me that that's actually not the place. I actually feel like it puts me in a better footing, because I'm willing to say, all right, I don't really know. I'm willing to change my mind or think about it more deeply, but I certainly understand that this stuff is very complicated. And there's nothing more complicated, by the way, than the kinds of things that I talk about every day. It's like human beings. I mean, oh my God, it's so. But the other side that I get is I do a lot of things that, because we have these videos, I do a lot of things that that you can't see everything that's behind it. So you don't really know what's going on and what's happening. So for example, a number of years ago, there was I had a student in class who stuttered, and it was really serious stutter. And by the way, right now, there's probably some way. A stutter is what it was called when I was as far back as I can remember. But now I haven't learned what would be the more appropriate. A speech impediment is fine, but what's the speech impediment is actually a stutter. There's probably a word for it.
A better word
that
for
usually
that.
I would learn.
Sure.
Yeah, I would learn that, but I haven't learned it. And so someone would call me out. It's like, that's not cool. You should say this. I'm like, okay.
Sure.
But in any case, and so he started talking, and I gave him the microphone in the room, right? So it's a big, huge room. There's 800 people in it. And they say like, oh, okay, hang on a second. And he couldn't get the words out. And I turned my mic off and I said, hey, but he raised his hand to answer the question. So first off, I'm like, he's raising his hand. He knows he's going to have a hard time getting his comment out. The rest of, I used to be the faculty advisor for the Disabled Student Association at Rutgers University. So I'm really comfortable in this whole world of whatever disabilities are. So so the first thing was I just sat and waited for him to get it out. Meanwhile, I know the whole class is just getting really nervous because they're nervous for him. I'm like,
of course,
why are you nervous for him? He's not nervous. Like he took the microphone and he's asking the question, right? It took him about a minute. When he got done, I turned my mic off and I said, hey, do you want to come down front? Would it be easier for you to just come down and sit on the table in front? He's like, yeah, okay. So I said, hey, come on. So we went down front, right? Now, mind you, no one knows that I asked him to come down if he wanted to come down front. People had the idea that I told him to come down front. Now he's front and center on the table. The whole class is watching him. And so the first thing I say is like, hey, is it easier to sit here? The whole class is watching you, or was it easier to be at your seat? And he's like, oh, it's the same. I said, okay, well, good. So you got this experience here now. I said, listen, I got all day. Class is out at X time. We got all day. So I have a few questions for you. Can you answer them? He's like, yeah, I can answer them. Okay. So anyway, we had a great experience. He ends up working for us as a facilitator, right? It was just like, dude, you're amazing, very insightful, right? With the whole thing, right? By the end of his college career, he had worked through so much of what his anxiety was. His speech pattern was so much more fluid. But I got critiqued on that because people didn't see what actually happened, which was me saying like, hey, I'm going to give this guy the power to do what he wants to do. And so I think a lot of times things happen in that way, that we critique people without knowing what the full story is.
Sure, it definitely can happen.
Yeah.
Something in regards to that, and I guess maybe because this is in your wheelhouse, I'm kind of curious about is so I did music in college, and I started music a little bit late. I started my freshman year of high school. A lot of people seem to start in grade school. I started my freshman year of high school. I did something called beginner band. So it was like me and 3 other kids, like people that usually would just take band because they just wanted to pass an elective in high school or whatever. For my freshman year. And I remember, but I really liked music. When I started doing it, I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. I wish we would have started this earlier. And I think I wanted to join my jazz ensemble, the school jazz band. I wanted to join them on my second semester of my high school year, which is not typically allowed because usually if you're in a beginner band student, you're not going to be able to play with a jazz group or whatever. And I remember that I asked the teacher, Mr. Johnson, best teacher I've ever had, I asked him if I could join. And, he said, if you join, it's going to be difficult, if you really want to, blah, blah, blah. I had so much respect for this man. He was very good at like treating you a certain way. Like he had very high expectations of you. And you never cared about like the grade or any of that. You always wanted to live up to his expectations of you. And I remember that I had one moment where I think it was either my first or second rehearsal with the actual jazz band. And I made some mistakes. The literature was probably a little bit too hard for me, and I made some mistakes. And I remember that he walked up. It was really early in the rehearsal. He's like, "Hey, like," he said something to the effect of like, maybe you're not ready for this yet, or you need to figure this out because you're not playing this well. And I'd never practiced so hard in my life for like that week because I never wanted to hear that message from him again. And something that I get, and I understand maybe not everybody learns this way or not everybody likes that kind of like motivation. For me, it felt big. I read a book a long time ago. I always recommend this book. It's such an amazing book. It's that Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's that idea that people live up to their expectations. Something that I get a little worried about sometimes is we talk a lot about on the left. So the right likes to focus on individuals, and the left likes to focus on overlaying structures of society. And I get worried sometimes we talk about the structure so much that you end up disempowering people on the left, because if you can make an excuse for your failure, it's very easy to always fall back on that excuse. How do you balance it? Or do you ever get worried that, like, for certain types of minority students, for women, for black people, that it becomes very easy to say, like, oh, I didn't get this because a guy was racist, or I didn't get this because somebody was sexist, or whatever, that they start appealing to those broader injustices, and it somehow, like, inhibits or hampers personal growth? Do you ever think about things like this, or how do you balance this? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think about it all the time, and I think that, you know, human beings have we're most of us are in the middle in terms of the degree to which we blame ourselves for the problems that befall us versus blame other people. When I don't do well on a test, is it me? Did I not study, or was the test unfair, or whatever? And I think it's a kind of thing where you know, it's okay sometimes to try to identify the places in a larger structure, the larger system, that are really unjust and unfair, but always with a certain kind of focus on ourselves, right? Like, we always have to look at the places where what I find is pretty much doesn't matter across the board, whether it's, you know, rich students or poor students, or white students or black students or brown students, or gay or straight, or whatever it is, right? I don't find much of a difference between the people, and I'm just talking about students. I also look at people, right? I mean, obviously, I have a very, very complex and diverse friend and colleague network all over the world. I don't see much of a difference between people in the degree to which they don't take responsibility for themselves.
Gotcha. So you think it's all more or less the same, yeah?
Yeah, I really do. Now, I think that we create these ideologies, right? These arguments that make it seem as though we're not forcing people to take responsibility. But the truth is, people are taking responsibility. Look, the most conservative hour of the week, or 2 or 3 hours, actually, the most conservative, hands down, is in a black church on a Sunday morning.
Sure.
You know, you will never get a more conservative argument there. It's like, everything that happens to you is your fault. Fix yourself. Pull yourself up. Stop blaming other people. I mean, the message is just unbelievably conservative. Far more conservative than you're going to get at one of these big white megachurches. Like, who's that? The guy and the pretty boy down in Dallas or Houston or wherever he is, the white guy.
The guys that are doing the prosperity gospel stuff.
Who's the guy? What's his name? The guy with the. I mean, there's so many of them, but, you know, whatever.
Oh, Joel Osteen is one of them. That was the guy with the big church that people were mad that he wasn't letting people stay in during a flood or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the average black church is has a far more conservative message than Joel. He's just like, okay, whatever. But yeah, anyway, that would be my take on that. And again, I'm someone who's on the ground, right? And the problem is, not the problem, but like, I'm in the middle of it every single day. You know what I mean? So I often, I just have ideas that it's not as bad. It's not nearly as bad as a lot of folks. You know, like somebody like, well, Ben Shapiro's like off the scale, but a lot of these folks, it's not nearly what people characterize it to be.
Gotcha. I hope it's not as bad as it characterizes it to be, like in schools. I know that for some of the media stuff, it gets very frustrating because you'll so like a really common example is recently there was a case of like I can't remember. There was a black guy that got out of a car who was shooting at cops, and as the cops go to get him, they end up shooting him because they think he's reaching for a gun. And people will compare that to the shooter in I think it was Buffalo, or it might have been another mass shooting. They're hard to keep track of, really. Where this kid, the cops found him at an intersection, and he got out of the car, he put his hands up, and they went down. And people immediately are going to look, they're treating him differently because he's white, and that guy differently because he's black. And it's like, well, it probably has more to do with the fact that the first guy was shooting at the cops, and the second kid just got out and got on his knees. I don't think it's like a race thing, but yeah. But
listen, you know, in terms of the one where this is the the young man in Ohio, right? I think it was Akron. And this someone who they shot at like 60 times or something. Well, the initial thing was he was shooting at the police, right? And I said, oh my God, all right, well, here it is. And then I listened further, right? Because I know if I'm going to talk about this stuff, I got to make sure I get a certain number of facts. Then I listen further, and I work with police, right? So I know, like, okay, I have a deep, I know that police policies are way more complex, the things that they do, than people imagine from the outside, the procedures and so on. Well, and then it turns out that's like, well, yeah, he shot, and they found a bullet casing in his car. He didn't have a gun on him, but they found a gun in his car, and then they found a bullet casing in his car, but they didn't know if it was from his gun. I'm like, well, hang on a second. You said he was shooting at the police, so either it was from his gun or it wasn't from his gun, and now you're not really sure. But it made it sound, the initial report made it sound like, he's like shooting at the police from his car.
As they're like driving and everything. Yeah. My understanding is I think it was
driving.
Yeah, one shot was fired, the cops called it, and then when he got out of the car, people said it looked like he was going for his belt, and then everybody started shooting. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, well, he was running away, and so then it becomes like, but in any case, God, when you talk to police, man, it's unbelievable. I talk to police, and it's like, okay, what about this case? And what about this case? And what about this case? And a very thoughtful police officer, right? Like, by the way, police are there's no one worse for police than bad police officers.
Yeah, of course.
It makes everybody's life hell, and they hate it, right? And so but I bring these cases. And they say, well, okay, but here, you got to think about this over here, and you got to think about this. And suddenly it's like everything else in life. It's like, oh, damn, I never thought about that. Like, okay, right? And so, you got 60 million, every year you got about 60 million police civilian encounters in the United States. Not that many go bad.
Yeah,
but those that do are problematic.
Yeah. Right. Do you know who Scott Alexander is? He writes a blog, the Slate Star Codex blog, but he's got a very interesting essay about how bad we are as humans with grappling with data, and he goes on to write that and this is a good point, right? Like, people will say, I get frustrated because progressives seem to understand this on one end, but they want another. People will say, like, oh, black crime is horrible, and it's like, okay, well, how much crime should there be? And it's like, none. One murder is too much, and it's like, okay, well, that's unrealistic, right? There's always going to be some level of crime in society, but then we'll turn around and we'll do it to police officers too. Like, if I could show you, this is a challenging question, to ask your progressive. If I could show you one bad cop killing every single week, is that a bad thing? And like, to even answer that question honestly, well, you kind of have to understand, well, how many cops are there? What if I tell you there are 50,000 cops and there's one cop shooting every week, right? Do you think that's a bad thing? It's like 50,000 cops. Okay, yeah, that's a really bad thing. Sure, that's pretty bad. But then what if I tell you, well, there's not 50,000, there's 500,000? In your mind, does that bad thing become okay now because now I have 10x the number of cops? No, people don't think that way, right? They think about these one discrete events. If I could show you one brutal bad cop killing every month, it would be over. We'd be back to rioting. But is that even really that bad of a thing? If there are over 500,000 police officers in the United States, we would expect to see some level of misconduct, right? Like, what is the expectation we're placing on cops or any other member of society to not act in a negligent or criminal or bad way? There's going to always be some level of crime or misconduct, Yeah.
Well, okay, so there are actually about 900,000 police, and there's about 1,000 people that are killed by the police every year. On average, it's 1,000, and on average, about 50 of them are unarmed. And so, okay, you got about 60 million police human interactions, and I don't mean an interaction where a police officer's, I was doing a ride along, and we're riding along, and somebody waves to the cops, and he waves back. That's not an interaction. An interaction is when you're engaging with somebody. Right? Yeah. So you think about 60 million, and you think, okay, 1,000. You think about, we have about 400 million guns in this country. You got 1,000 people who are killed, about 50 of them unarmed. It's okay. Really, it's probably, I might expect those numbers to be a lot higher.
Yeah.
And mind you, police should be held accountable for it, right? But man, Okay, and I get that. And is there racism? Look, I've been studying racism in the criminal justice system for my whole career. So, like, I know the data. I'm very good at it. I can talk about it. I taught racism in an African American studies department for 12 or 13 years. I'm really good. I can lay it out very carefully and very thoughtfully. And yet, what you're saying about the data, but hang on, but step back and look at the numbers and let's look at this, right? What would we expect and what do we see? And like, yeah, people are pretty well trained, you know, for the most part, things go quite well. Human beings we're actually really good. We're good with each other. We're thoughtful, we're kind, we're careful, you know. When's the last time I saw even two people getting into an argument with each other anywhere, right? I mean, it's been, except my wife and I, but other than that, it's been like a long time. So it's like, life is really not that dangerous, really. In some places it is, right? So, you know, the crime rate, you take like Newark, Delaware, right? Very high crime rate. At some point several years ago, it was the murder capital of the world. But what you don't hear is that, look, 90% of those murders happened in a 6-block radius in Newark, Delaware. Yeah. So like, let's be really clear about what we're talking about here. So,
yeah. Or people that have never been to like Chicago or anything will think that like every single street on Chicago is like bathed in blood. And it's like, no, as long as you know like the areas you're in. There are some very nice parts of Chicago. Like not every part is like embroiled in drug violence.
The vast majority of Chicago is quite. Look, I was in Chicago. One of our former students teaches there. And so we visited him in a school that is right in the heart of everywhere you don't want to be, right? Such that, wow, just letting kids out of school was just an amazing experience to watch how this all unfolded, right? And you know, we got in his car and we drove back to where we were staying. And we're saying, okay, so he's like, yeah, so I go down this street. This street's fine, right? We go up here 2 streets. Now we're going to go down this street over here, you know, and it's just like one of these things thinking, oh man, okay, this is really complex. But the news on Chicago is like, hey, we had, you know, 13 killings this past weekend in Chicago. All right, it's a different story. So, you know, it's like, this is the stuff we have to, you know, working on all the time, you know?
Yeah. The lack of engagement with numbers is like really frustrating to me. I deal with this a lot because I see a lot of like anti-vax stuff, and you know there will be people talking about how like there are all these horrible side effects of the vaccines and blah blah blah. And it's like, man, at this point, billions of people have taken these shots. If there were these like hugely negative side effects, we'd be hearing. You'd have way more than like the 2 stories that everybody's talking about on Facebook. We would be seeing not hundreds and not thousands, not tens of, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of these cases popping up. It wouldn't just be like the 2 chief examples that everybody throws around. Like, and the idea that you could hide like that much, you know, vaccine side effects, like there's just no way. Like you wouldn't have to convince anybody of anything. We'd all see it constantly. But everybody.
It's the games, right? My wife, she studied human development for her PhD, but essentially she has a PhD in statistics, right? And so a few years ago, we were reading through a couple of drugs that were suggested for her mother who had cancer. And like, she really dug into them to say, all right, hang on now. So this drug, it's efficacy on this issue, right? So they're recommending this drug. So she started looking at the studies and like, oh my God, if you understood statistics, you'd have to start from scratch. You'd have to read these studies, and you get to the end of the study and you think, well, there were of 1,000 people. If she takes this drug, if she's one of 1,000 people that takes this drug, 5 of those 1,000 people might prolong their life for an additional 6 months, kind of thing, right? It's like, but that was enough to pass through, right? To validate that drug, right? Oh my God, right? So this kind of stuff, like the more you know, the more you have to know in order to be able to say anything meaningful about pretty much anything that's going on day by day. Yeah. And if we really followed somebody around who knows about whatever the issue is, and we understand the level of ignorance that all of us are walking around with, we wouldn't offer an opinion about pretty much anything.
Yeah, that's
which is troubling for me as a teacher.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I've learned so many random stats things because every time like the new conspiracy comes out for vaccine related stuff, it's like, people come out like, did you know that if you look at, people are using they're using relative risk ratios instead of absolute risk ratios, and this is what and it's like, oh well, what does this mean? And then you read about it and it's like, okay, well, you would never use this to measure the efficacy of a drug. This is stupid. But like, you have to, it sucks because every new theory that comes out, you have to go and read. It's like, well, now I need to learn this thing, and now I got to learn this thing. But people will hop for, as soon as you disprove one thing, they'll hop to the next thing, and it's just like, the vaccine stuff was one of my favorite medical related things ever was in Florida. I think DeSantis passed something to kick trans people off of Medicaid, and part of the bottom part of his statement was, we don't believe in some of these trans studies because we haven't seen any good prospective randomized controlled trials showing the efficacy of gender affirming care. And I'm like, wow, prospective randomized controlled trials, you guys didn't care at all about that when you were talking about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or any of the number of anti SARS-CoV-2 drugs. Like, why? But now you guys seem to have a really good understanding of what good studies and science are. What happened? And it's so frustrating. Oh my God. Yeah. Jeez.
Well, this is all we can do, and I guess I would say this to your listeners, is just recognize that, if you really don't want to be dumb, recognize all the places in which your own ideology is going to seep into arguments, like kind of accepting something that someone says just because it fits with the narrative that you have of the world. And this is why it's so important to be reading things or listening to things and perspectives that are really opposite of what it is that you imagine to be true.
Yeah.
And it's painful to me, actually. Sometimes I feel embarrassed. I'm in my class, I'm talking about things. There's 5 cameras going, people are watching, and sometimes I feel really embarrassed, like I'm gonna say something really, really dumb, but I have to because it's my job and it's what I get paid to do. So I'm just gonna keep talking.
Yeah.
But that's increasingly why what I do is we really don't talk very much. I bring students down to the front of the class, and I interview them. Like, we talk, we engage, right? It's a very active class. Like, there's not really. I've learned at this stage of the game that there's not much I can say that anybody's very interested in, but they are interested in hearing from their colleagues, right? From other people, and so then people pay attention, and that makes it pretty cool. So, so I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I guess I'm lucky in that I can be wrong because I'm not a teacher, so. Most of the stuff that I learn is usually I'll take bold positions on a lot of things, well, caveating that I don't know, but thankfully I'm lucky that I have like a pretty educated fan base. So if I'm ever saying something that seems like particularly insightful, it's going to be like it's going to be because I said something really stupid and then a really educated person emailed me to correct me on it. So I'm lucky that I have a lot of really educated people in my audience that'll send me.
Well, they don't say it in your chat. I mean, I watch your chat. I've seen your chat going by so fast. It's like you're not going to get it there, right? So it would have to be an email. And I get that. I get that I get emails from people all over the world because people watch. I don't know. Jeff calculated, I think, like 200 plus different countries have watched. So I get emails from all sorts of places, and people send me information. Say, I heard you talking about this. You may want to read this article here, be really useful, and that's just really a beautiful thing, and I find that there's so many people that just want to make the world a better place by helping to make people think more clearly about whatever the issue is. There's something out there, and I mostly try to stay away from the people who are not doing that. They're just really not interested in it. They just want to push their agenda.
The demagogues. Yeah,
but it's all good.
Go.
So what else? What else do you got?
I'm trying to think if there's anything else, or if I can think of anything else.
How do you? Yeah. I have one for you.
Yeah, go for it.
So, you were preparing for the Ukraine debate, right? How much time did you spend preparing for that? Like, what did you?
That one was probably days for that one. It depends on the level of familiarity that I have with the topic. So, like, if it's a vaccine-related thing, probably take me 20 minutes to read an article to figure something out because I know so much background on it. But Ukraine-Russia stuff, I was pretty late getting to that combo because I think I spent a couple weeks trying to figure out background information beforehand. History and geography. I keep saying this, but I shouldn't. I keep saying history is kind of a weak point of mine, but it's not really. It's just everyone pretends to know way more about history than they actually do. I've learned this more and more as people tell me, like, you need to learn history. It's like, okay, I did, and you're even more wrong than I thought. Yeah, typically what'll happen is so for like Ukraine, Russia, I think the start is like I'll Wikipedia Ukraine and I'll look for like the most recent thing that happened. So it would have been like the Euromaidan and then the Revolution of Dignity, I think is what they call it, in 2014. And then I'll just read. And then anytime like a name or an event or something pops up that I don't know, I'll like kind of branch off and I'll read about that. And I guess the way that I kind of learn things is what I feel is that like if I read an article, if I read something about a topic that I don't know anything about, I'll probably be able to recall maybe like 20% of the information. Like maybe I'll remember that much, but the rest of it will be there in the back of my head. So if I read one thing and then the next day I go to read something else, eventually what will happen is things will start popping up where I go like, oh, I remember that from this thing. And then like the connections start happening. And then hopefully after going through that process for several days or a few weeks, eventually I'll see an event and I'll go, I already know why that happened because of this, that, and that. And I bet this is because of this. And then that'll start to happen after reading things, which I'm pretty sure this is how all people learn, but like, So for the Russia stuff, it was probably a couple weeks of like reading and learning about a ton of different things. And then once I've done that, I'll start going to like YouTube videos and essays and seeing like, well, who's saying things that I agree with or disagree with, and then why or why not. And then I can like read more from there. One thing that I learned that is somebody emailed me this and I'll never forget this. I'm so happy about this. Is like when you're engaging with the facts of history, you are never you're never. There's something that I'd never heard about before. I did decent in high school. I'd never heard about this. It's called historiography. I was never aware of the idea that like when you engage in history, you're always making this normative selection of facts. You know, you don't report on every single thing. And so I understand better how like somebody can make a YouTube video or like basically an argumentative or persuasive essay about a topic, and they don't really say anything that's wrong, but because of the facts they've chosen to present, the story is so unbelievably misleading that it's basically wrong without really saying anything incorrect, you know? But
and that's where you can get into trouble if you don't go far enough in taking a topic, say like Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. But yeah, exactly. I mean, I see this. The older I get, I see that more and more because I just have learned more over the years. And I'm aware, like, well, hang on. Or if something just seems a little bit outlandish or a little bit too clear or a little bit, you know, this is the reason that, I don't know, the French Revolution happened. I mean, this is the reason?
Yeah.
Come on, man.
The most common one for a race realist would be like Rome fell because of multiculturalism. I've heard that so many. I was like, really? The one thing, that's it. That it just happens to be that your pet issue that you feel the most strongly about was the one thing that's altered all of human history. That's so convenient for you. I'm happy for you.
The absurdity of that. Well, you know, you think just right now, how would you, if you had to write up, you know, I asked someone this the other day. If you had to write up 100 pages and put it in a time capsule and slip it away to explain what's happening in the United States, just the United States today, you got 100 pages. What would you say? You know, what would you say? What communities would you focus on? And what people would you focus on? Because it's that we're 330 million people. There's a lot happening here. And so, like, what are you going to talk about? And so that's the historiography issue. It's like, well, you're going to pick and choose the kinds of things, but that's not what it is. You know, Howard Zinn, you know, his book, of the People's History of the United States, or this other one, you know, like that I used to use, Takaki. He was a sociologist, historian. Just wrote a history from the average people in the United States, right? Just from the bottom up, just to say, hey, let's not talk about these events up here. Let's actually talk about what was going on in these communities, you know, all these different communities. And it's so fascinating. There's nothing that's in all the other history books, and yet one of the most fascinating ways of reading history. So yeah, but we don't do that, right? It's just not what it is. And listen, I was in Ukraine. I was in Maidan Square. And I was talking to people in Maidan Square about what actually happened when the killings happened and who the groups are and what the groups are. And it's like, That's complex, man. Anybody just coming to that story, in the past, 6 months or so, like it is incredibly complex. All the groups of people and it's just like here in the United States.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Yeah, but
man.
depending on your perspective, so like for a lot of the pro-Russian people or a lot of the conservatives, be like, oh, well, it was a U.S. coup, and it's like. There were a lot of groups of people with a lot of grievances in Ukraine. It was arguably the most corrupt country in the world for years leading up to 2014. And you're going to tell me the only reason how that could have happened or going to explain it with a coup? I don't think they needed a coup I don't think they needed any external motivation at all for everything going there. Yeah, it's just, it's wild to me. Yeah, but people don't want to engage with all of with everything going on around it, Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, and it does require, and again, I keep saying this, but I think it's probably good for folks who follow you. It requires just an immense amount of humility. The more we know, the more I know, the less I know.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really terrible. I'm going to be, I'm going to die. I'm going to go through the light. And as I'm going through the light, I'm going to be reaching back to just say one final thing, and I'm not going to be able to say it, and I'm just going to go and move on, and that'll be the end.
Yeah.
It's like, well.
Do you feel like, here's like a question. When I'm 33, I still have the feeling that like everything I said 2 years ago was so stupid. Do you still have that? Not necessarily like stupid, but just like, oh God, like how could I have been so young and dumb when I was 31? Like, why didn't I realize this or some piece of wisdom? Yeah. Do you feel like that feeling has ever stopped for you, or do you still have the thing where it's like, man, I should have, like, I can't believe I didn't understand this concept.
That the time span gets longer, right? So when I was 33, I thought my 30-year-old ideas were dumb. But when I was 50, it was like, my early 40s ideas were really stupid.
Gotcha.
Now that I'm 61, I'll be 62 in a couple months. It's more like, those early 50s ideas were really not very thoughtful. Gotcha. So that's good, right? I'm hoping at some point I can just kind of really mostly live amongst my ideas.
Gotcha.
But I have a few things though. Once in a while I do something that's really brilliant. It just comes out of nowhere and think, whoa, that was a really cool idea. And then for me, I'll often tell my class, like, I'll stop and I'll say, listen, man, it happened the other day. I said, you have no idea. I just have to tell you this. But what I just said was effing brilliant. Okay. Sure. I can't remember what it is. I stumbled upon it accidentally, but it really was brilliant. And I know it didn't mean anything to you, and I'm going to move on. And there are a lot of people who wouldn't think it's brilliant, but from my perspective, that was brilliant.
Sure.
And it was mostly lucky that I came upon the thought. And that, I think if we can have fun with ourselves in that sort of way, then I think we'll be much better off.
Gotcha.
Hey, by the way, you know David Horowitz?
I've heard the name. Who is this?
Yeah, well, you can look him up. He's part of this Front Page mag or frontpage.org, and he used to be a far left guy, and then he became he sort of made the switch shortly after Reagan, and became a hardline right winger, and then he wrote this book in the late 90s called the Professors, the 101 Most Dangerous Professors in America. And he picked out 101 people that he just hated, who are all radical left liberal.
Sure.
And so he put me in the book. And the reason he put me in the book, even though I wasn't radical left liberal, but he was on a radio program and he was talking about Cuba.
Yeah.
And I'm a Latin Americanist in my training. So I studied Cuba, right? I mean, this is the thing. And I just called up. And so did he study Cuba. I'm like, dude, you know this, right? Like, oh my God, you lived through it. Because he's older than I am. But I just called up and I said, you're just wrong. You're just making, you're making up these stories. So if you're rewriting history, like that's not how, whatever it was that he was arguing about, So we just went back and forth. And then I was on his list, right? As like a radical leftist, even though I was just making this argument, right? And then I was in this book, and it was just kind of the first time that I hit, national kind of limelight in a way, because it was like a really big deal, and all that stuff that came of that. But the reason I bring that up is because it's one of these places or these ways in which we're not in control of our own narratives. We're not in control of our own stories. You know, I got labeled this radical left winger, even though I wasn't a radical left winger. And they picked and chose. They were able to get my syllabi and pick and choose certain things that make it seem as though I was really, really radical left. But they just picked certain things. You know what I mean? And but we're not in control of our stories, right? And the narratives. You know, you're not in control. I mean, you maybe are a little more in control than many people because, you know, you're on a lot, you're talking a lot, so you have enough. But and I'm probably now more in control because I have so many, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos out there. But
yeah, it's kind of weird. In some ways, the more in control you are, the less in control of you are, because usually the more people have a vested interest in morphing the narrative about you. You know. Like, I never felt like when I was like working at a casino that I didn't have control over my narrative because nobody was trying to write one for me. Whereas now I obviously have a much bigger platform than when I was a teenager, but there's a million people that want to say I'm saying things that I don't believe I'm really saying. So, yeah.
And what's the average age, do you think, of your listeners, people who follow you?
I think it tends a little older than like normal audiences because we do a lot of politics. I want to say it's around 26 or 27. I know we've collected data on this before. I'd have to go and look at it, but I think that's probably about the median.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I would imagine that. Hey, how about if I drop, I can, just so if people are interested.
Yeah, give me a link to anything, yeah.
I'll drop the trailer. Jeff made this trailer for my class. And you can put this in your chat. You know, I'm so used to my class. Things have to go really fast because
you're on a time limit, yeah.
I have a time limit and people, you know, get bored. If I'm not like engaging people enough, they'll pick up their phones. And then I'm like, okay, I just got to be, and I have mostly allowed people to have their phones in class, so that's starting to change because I just feel like I just got to be more interesting than what's on people's phones. But, you know, they have like sports and porn on their phones, so it's hard to be more interesting than that. But, you know, but I'm starting to shift it. And anyway, that's just the short minute-long trailer. That it's nice. It kind of lays out what kind of the scope of things.
Gotcha. I looked at my chats. Do you have you ever had students that have expressed either discomfort or disappointment in something you said in class? Like they felt like it was like too ideologically opposite them or anything like that, or?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, there's always something, but mostly what I tell people, and they really follow, look, students are pretty damn thoughtful, man. Doesn't matter. The far left ones, the far right ones, students are pretty thoughtful. And I tell them, look, the things that you're not comfortable with, you got to understand there's half the people in the class are really, first off, it's like a third that are really conservative, a third that are really liberal, and then the other folks in the middle. But I would say, and it was more like 25% really liberal, 25% conservative, and half in the middle. And I said, so if you're really uncomfortable with some conservative thing that I said, or that I allowed some student to say, like, I don't know, whatever it is, like everyone should own an AR-15 or whatever, there should be no gun control whatsoever, and you're really uncomfortable with that, well, understand that they're uncomfortable with something that you said or that somebody else said who you agreed with. So like you can't, you got to play it both ways here. And so for the most part, that stops a lot of the criticism that I would normally get from students who would feel uncomfortable about things, because they really see that okay, I'm uncomfortable with somebody else uncomfortable with that. And then, you know, it's like, it's all sorts of things. I remember not long ago, a few semesters ago, well, before COVID, I brought some students down front, and we were talking. I just was using an example about needing to really have experiences in order to feel comfortable with things. And I drew on my experience with the disability student, it was called the Rutgers Handicapable Association. And I drew on my experience that once I started as the faculty advisor to that organization, I was only a grad student at the time, or when I ended my tenure, I was far more comfortable with all issues related to disability than I was when I started. And it's only because I just had to engage so many different things, right? And so I was talking to the class about this and how important it is that you just have these experiences that might seem uncomfortable, like your first experience talking to someone who has transitioned, right? Gone from M to F or F to M. Look, your first experience is gonna be a little bit uncomfortable, or just someone who's cross-dressing, let's say, I don't know, because it's just the nature of it. But after your 10th one or whatever, it's like, oh, okay, whatever, it's no big deal. So I was demonstrating something like an experience I had with one of my former students in a wheelchair, and I walked through it, and it's kind of funny, and it was very funny actually. Well, after class, this woman came down and she said, "Oh God, thank you for doing that. It was funny. My brother's in a wheelchair, and like it just felt like you made it real. He always feels like he's just a freak, an object of people, but you actually made it real. It was so good. I'm so glad the class had the opportunity to see that, to see you do that and talk about it in that way." So she left. A minute and a half later, this other woman who was waiting comes to me and says, "I'm so offended by what you did." I'm like, "Why?" She said, "Oh, my father's in a wheelchair, and like you just made light of it, and it just felt like it." And I was like, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, "Well, you need to go talk to her, because that's how this works." And so that's the kind of stuff that happens on a fairly regular basis. I think in most environments that we're in anywhere in the world, really.
Sure.
And so I kind of rely on that happening.
Yeah, I was going to say...
That's a long answer to your question.
No, yeah, that's perfectly fine. I think it coincides with what I've learned so far. I think throughout my 20s, especially my late 20s, I get into political debate. I'm a very big data guy. The data gives me the answers, blah, blah, blah. Who cares about anecdotes or whatever? And then something I've learned, especially now in my early 30s, is, and I hate that this is the case, because there's always that quote, like smart people learn through experience, but the truly wise learn through other people's experience, or something like that. I found that, like, personally, I feel like personal experiences, there is no shortcut to that. And now that's like something that I'm like addicted to. Like, I need to experience a certain thing to truly have an understanding of it, because the understanding that I gain from having that experience is just so much greater than any amount of studies are good and they inform your worldview, but like ultimately at the end of the day, when we're talking about anything sociological or anything in the whole field of any of the software sciences, we're really talking about, at the end of the day, the unit that we're analyzing is the individual, right? That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. And getting to hear about people's experiences or having experiences, there's no shortcut for the type of perspective you gain there.
The more wisdom you have and the more experiences you have, the better you become at generalizing, right? So like, I know when I have I can go to another country that I've never been in, and I can make generalizations about that country based on the 50 other countries I've been in and lived in, and just my age and my experiences, and I just get better at it. And in a way, as a sociologist, I'm a professional generalizer, right? Because I have to make statements about populations of people that are composed of individuals, and so. Yeah, so I think the anecdotes and so on are really, really important. But you have to you learn as you get older, right? And this is what you're saying. You learn how to talk about them in a way that say like, hey, this isn't everybody. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that matters. And I play up. I know where I need to do it. Like for example, just to go, black and brown people. This kind of sense that. When here in the United States, when we talk about black people or Native Americans or Latinos, Hispanics, especially Mexicans, the idea is like it's just equated with poor. Black equals poor. And so I'm like, come on, man, like half of all black Americans are in the middle class. That means of the other half, you got the rich people and then you have poor people. It's like, stop doing that. And people do that who aren't in the community. They've never been in a wealthy black community, let's say, right? So what I'll do is say, like, I'll get the 3 or 4 or 5 wealthiest black people in the class to come down and talk about their lives. And they're richer than most of the white people, almost all the white people in the class, because they're rich, you know what I mean? And I'm like, and you got to do those kinds of things. And then I say, like, listen, this isn't everybody, but you got to break. I'm always having to break the stereotypes that people have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because on one hand you want to be able to generalize, but then on the other hand you have to be. It's crazy because like generalizing is simultaneously like, it's a very difficult skill, but it's necessary, but it can be used in like either the worst way possible or at the best way possible, you know? Like, like I've had an experience where something is really annoying when somebody repeatedly does something to me. And, like I can generalize that to your experience of like sexism or racism. And I can have an understanding of why this is such a horrible thing to deal with. Because if you have to deal with something on a daily basis, it can become like oppressive. I can understand that. But then on the other hand, you could also generalize like, I'm a white person and sometimes people call me racial slurs, but I don't really care about it. So why do you care about it? You could generalize in bad ways too. So like, generalizing is an important tool. But you have to learn how to employ it in a responsible way. That's something that Democrats are having to learn with the upcoming elections is like generalizing, even just saying like brown people and black people in the United States. There are lots of different groups of brown people. There are lots of different groups of black people. They have very different experiences. Like an immigrant from, from Kenya or an immigrant from Nigeria, it probably has a PhD in something and it's coming from a decently wealthy background versus like an African American or a descendant of a slave family. There's these are things.
Well,
that,
I think that the other side is that, and I see this with a lot of folks, and especially I would say that in the white community a lot. I mean, I'm going to generalize, right? More recently, in the past few years, white people have tried to like kind of make up ground, but that doesn't mean they've actually studied anything. But people don't really understand the amount of racism that has existed, that is built into the systems here in the United States. And that helped to create they helped to create the country that we have. And that, when you drive through North Philly and you realize, hey, North Philly, 60 years ago, 70 years ago was actually a pretty thriving community, when white people lived there, right? Well, if you don't understand what happened and the ways in which racism fueled everything that happened to lead North Philly to become what it is today, then you don't really understand. And most people don't. They don't take the time. And I think that this is really what's unfortunate, because it leads to a lot of, just generalizations in both ways. I don't know. Just like the generalization that white people equals power. It's like, man, you ever been to a poor white community? Like a poor white community, man, they're, oh my God. Like, and then, it's just.
That screaming over and over again that like white privilege, like that message is not going to be felt by poor white communities that are dealing with, their own drug problems and crime problems and everything. You're the kid coming from the trailer park isn't feeling his white privilege, very much.
No.
Even if like on a sociological
Trump
level.
is a household name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But.
Go ahead. Even as a sociological level.
I was gonna say, like, even things that might be sociologically true are kind of brain dead or tone deaf to bring up at the time. It's like, the white kid in a trailer park arguably has some white privilege. He's not losing things in life because he's white, but like that individual is not going to feel that at that moment in time. Much the same that like a kid whose parents dies, you wouldn't be like, well, hey, at least your mom's still alive, even if your dad is dead. That's fine. Like you're lucky. It's like, well, they probably don't feel that way at the time. Yeah.
No, but he might lose some things because he's white, because he didn't. But mostly what you're saying is true, right? And he might lose some things because it's like, dude, there's people will sometimes say you fumbled your privilege, or he won't lose it because he's white, but he'll lose it because he has crooked teeth.
Sure.
It's like, okay, I got that, right? So, so it's a. Well, I mean, this is fun, right? This is the fun of it, right? As long as we don't get, too deep into the mud.
It's obvious that my hands are cold.
Hey, listen, man, I'm gonna cut out, and I do need to cut out here. But it's a good conversation, so maybe we'll do it again at some point.
Yeah, if anything ever comes up, or a topic, or anything like that, or if Jeff ever bugs you for anything, feel free to shoot me an email. We can chop up, whatever.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, it's good having the conversation.
Yeah, have a good one, man.
Yep.
Bye.
All right, be well. Ciao.
Wait, real quick.
Yeah.
What's like one thing? I know you linked that trailer earlier, but if people could like follow you or find you anywhere, do you have like a Twitter or anything like that you want people to like follow you on, or?
Yeah. It's funny. I just got kicked off Facebook.
Oh, no.
I haven't been really using Facebook, but I had about 3,000 followers, and I got kicked off because maybe I got hacked or something. I don't really know what happened, but I was kind of done with it anyway. I think Jeff has done, and by the way, I keep referring to this Jeff guy. It's Jeff Hamill. Is the guy who's in control of my. Destiny knows him.
Yeah, he does. He's the guy that does all the video work for me when I go to events and everything, guys.
Yeah, who like is who would be really an awesome videographer for somebody out there to grab onto because I'm work full time because he's really amazing. He not a videographer. I mean, he's everything. He does everything, right? Streaming, but in any case. He really has built up the stream so that we have about 60,000 subs at this point. And I think that's probably the best place to go. It's SOC119, SOC119 on YouTube. That's our channel. And I think that probably at this stage of the game would be the best thing. And, you know, and we just talked about the United States, but, you know, we're really connected to folks. You know, I mean, a lot of our work is in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So we have people around the world who are regularly visiting class. You know, we got Mr. Rashidi and Bassam and different people who are just people who are really awesome, awesome human beings.
Yeah, cool.
Do a lot of stuff in the Middle East, by the way. So if you are a person who really wants to kind of understand more about the Middle East or have a better sense of what's going on in the Middle East, like Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., it'd be really good to tap into a few of these classes because we do some really, I think, some very thoughtful things.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation. If anything comes up in the future, people are linking the YouTube channel in chat. Hopefully they give you a follow. And yeah, I appreciate the chat.
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, be well.
Yeah, have a good one.
Yep. Yeah, take care.
Nice. Wait, where was True Malma in chat? Was talking about a tweet for more vaccine stuff. Uh-oh. Where is it? Show it to me. Hold on, I'm gonna use the restroom real quick. 1 second.
Obama.